everyone, welcome back to my channel. Just to go ahead and do a disclaimer, I have a very scratchy, irritated throat, so I apologize if I start sounding extra weird or coughing. We are going to make some birthday shaker cards, and I have the Pinkfresh Studio Brushed Sentiments. This is a stamp, die, stamp, die, foil plate bundle. I am going to use some Ranger clear embossing for my sentiments just to make them a little extra shiny, and then I have some scrap packaging from all of the multiple stamp sets that I buy, and I'm going to use that to make a full panel shaker. I have a selection of Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks today. I have Amethyst, Orchid, Lilac, Mist, Cadette, and Royal. These are for some of my son's friends that are having quinceañeras this summer, and I wanted to make them some fun birthday cards. So I have some cardstock from Cardstock Warehouse. The purple is Colorplan Lavender, and the blue is Lessebo Salt Water. And I'm going to be using that to do some stenciling on. I got this these sequins in I think it was a Spellbinders like box. You spend so much money and they send you so much product kind of thing, and I got that in there. I'm also using the Simon Says Stamp MOSAIC Tulip stencil set. That's a set of 3 tulips, and I also have some VERSAMARK ink along with my clear Ranger embossing powder. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and stamp my sentiment, just so that I can get that out of the way. What's awesome about these Pinkfresh Studio stamps is that it will stamp all of these sentiments at one time. So they're all connected. If you wanted to, you could, of course, snip these apart. You could do partial inking. You could even just stamp all of it all together and have extras, but I just really wanted to focus on what I needed for this particular crafty session. I'm not feeling very good, so I didn't want to spend extra time doing extra things, even though that really is not quite the case with this particular stamp and die set, because it does stamp everything at one time. It cuts everything at one time, which is a huge time saver. A lot of companies are starting to do that now, and it is wonderful, and I love it. So I'm just making sure that both of my little scrap pieces of that cardstock are the same size so that I know that I don't have to shift and move things around. And I'm going to stamp this in the darkest ink. So if you don't have a whole bunch of colors of embossing powder, this is a wonderful trick or hack, however you want to call it, to make it look like you have all the embossing powder in all of the colors and it matches your projects perfectly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stamp these sentiments using the darkest ink. So in this case, this is the Amethyst on the purple, and I'm going to stamp it a couple times. Everything you see me do in this video, I repeat on the other card. So I may show you the purple, I may show you the blue, but I repeat it on the opposite card, just because I needed to make 2. So I'm going to double stamp that until I feel like I've got a good, crisp, deep, dark impression, and then I'm going to clean off the stamp and do the same thing to the blue. For the blue, my darkest ink was the Royal, and I'm going to stamp that. I think I ended up stamping that 3 times. I had a little section that had a piece of lint or something on it. And so I just stamped that one little section again, just to kind of give me a better image. So I'm going to clean off this stamp, and without moving the stamp, I'm going to clean it off, and then I'm going to restamp this in VERSAMARK ink. VERSAMARK is a clear sticky ink, so when I stamp this over the color and then apply my clear embossing powder, it is going to make it look like I stamped this in blue embossing powder, but I didn't. I do stamp it twice just to, and to quote Miss Laura Basson, make it nice. But I feel like I get a better impression that way. You don't necessarily have to do that. I just do. Sometimes if my ink pad is drying out and needs a re-inking, I have to stamp it twice or 2 or 3 times just to get the impression right. Here off screen, I apologize, I'm sprinkling on that Ranger clear embossing powder, and here I'm just double checking that I've got it everywhere I need it. I should have treated this with my anti-static powder tool, and I realized that after I heat set this one, and I do remember to apply that with this purple. So I'm going to go ahead and put my anti-static powder tool all over this just so that I get a crisper embossing image, and I don't get embossing powder where I don't want it. So on this one, it was kind of a happy accident. It was not intended, but I accidentally did not make sure that my paper was in that top right corner. And so when I stamp my VERSAMARK ink on the top of it, I get kind of a offset image, which makes it look like I have a shadow. It was actually a very happy accident. It looks really cool. And that's something else that you can do, is just slightly offset it. And it makes it look like you have a much more complex image than you really do. And all you do is just very slightly offset it. And here I discovered that I didn't make sure it was in the corner, but it's okay. It looks really nice once it's all heat set. So once I have my embossing powder on top of these, I am going to heat set them, and then we will be able to kind of get a better idea of how cool this little trick is. Here is the blue all heat set. That is without the happy accident, and this is with the happy accident. If you can see, it's just a little bit darker than the purple cardstock that I stamped it on, and it gives it this really fun, like drop shadow look. It's really cool and a very happy accident. Like I mentioned before, what's wonderful about these Pinkfresh Studio dies is that they are a one die and one stamp. They're one foil plate, and they cut everything out. One of the things that I love is that they do cut out the little holes inside everything. One of the things I did notice is that the, excuse me, kind of the bars that cut out those little innards cut into the embossing powder, so it made kind of an impression. It wasn't enough to bother me, but I think if I were to do that again, I would have probably just stamped first and then heat embossed last after I had die cut it. That would prohibit, that means I wouldn't get those kind of marks on it. Here I'm trying to kind of see if I can't scratch them out from the back and kind of even it out. It didn't work. And like I said, it didn't bother me enough to redo it. But if I was going to do this card again, I would stamp in the color, cut it out, and then go back and heat emboss them individually after I had die cut. Moving on to the stenciling. So here is that mosaic tulip. I am a sucker for tulips, and when I saw the stencil set, I felt like I needed to have it. Did I? No, I did not, but I wanted it, so I went and got it. I'm going to be using those inks that I showed you in the beginning. I wanted these particular tulip shapes to be the darkest, but it doesn't necessarily matter because I'm just doing everything tone on tone. Brevins, that's my son, his friends alike. And so I was trying to kind of cater the cards to his particular friends. So I go clockwise and counterclockwise, and I double checked it just to make sure I liked the saturation. I am doing this on a colored cardstock, so that does change the hue of things just a little bit. So that's just something to be aware of. I wanted to make this a little bit easier for myself, give it a little more interest, and so that's why I did it on colored cardstock instead of white, but that is also always an option for you. So that first one I did in the amethyst, this next one is the orchid, and that's just kind of the little bitty dot detail. I did discover that I did not have these stencils oriented quite right. I noticed that after I stenciled them. I just noticed that I was struggling a little bit to get things centered, and then I noticed that I had, so these are like indexed or etched in the bottom right corner with Simon Says Stamps logo. And if I would have made sure that all of those were going the same direction, it would have made this process a lot easier, but I didn't. It turned out fine in the end. This is the last stencil for the purple, and I'm going to be doing this in the lilac color. Here I'm just double checking that I have some variation in color, and it looks like I have 3 different colors instead of just 2. To add a little bit of detail to the edges of this, just to make it look like the center is almost glowing. Now, granted, we're going to make this into a shaker, so you could probably skip this step if you wanted to, but I wanted to add just a little bit of detail and interest to the edges. So I am taking, I think this is the orchid, and I'm just ink blending from the edges inward. And then I'm going to come in with the amethyst on the very, very outside edges of it. Again, this is going to make it look like the center is almost glowing. I am going to take 1/8 of an inch off of all 4 sides just so that we have a little bit of a border, and the eye kind of gets drawn into the center and toward the sentiment. Again, this step is totally optional. You could skip it if you wanted to, but I wanted to add this interest. I do repeat this for the blue card, and I use the Royal and Cadette for the ink blending on that one. This one I did the tulip shapes in the Royal. I'm doing the next layer in Cadette, and then the final kind of lacy eyelet looking, this layer right here is in the mist. And then I repeat the same thing, adding Cadette and Royal to the edges, and then I do go back and trim off 1/8 of an inch off of all 4 corners of this one also. So here I've taken that packaging. This is from a stamp set. I just robbed it of its packaging and kept it in just a folder kind of hidden in my craft room, because obviously this is not necessarily pretty to look at, but it is wonderful shaker card material. So I just kind of trimmed that around, leaving maybe about 1/2 an inch or so on each side. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim this down so that I have 2 panels for my 2 cards here. I do recommend a double-sided tape for this, or a tape runner. Anything that is strong but not a liquid glue. Liquid glue will work, but you're going to have to let it sit for a ridiculous amount of time for it to dry and actually set. I do feel like a tape runner or a double-sided tape is definitely the way to go when you're making a full edge-to-edge shaker. So I am just taking this, it's about 1/4 of an inch double-sided tape, and I'm just putting it all along the perimeter on the back of each of these panels. And then what I'm going to do is remove the backer on 3 sides and 3 sides only. Then I'm going to fold up that packaging around those 3 sides. And that is going to leave me with a little bit of a pocket at the top for me to add all of my little shaker elements. So I'm going to repeat that on both cards, and this just, I'm leaving that one there. And then for this purple one, I'm using this mix I got, I think it's called Rose. I'll link it below, or I'll list it below. And I'm going to dump in a crazy amount. In fact, I realized I dumped in way too much, so I pour some more of that back in. But you just fill it with whatever shaker elements you want. I recommend doing something that is flat, just so that you, particularly if this is something that you're going to have to mail, I recommend doing something flat so that it mails easier. For the blue one, I just went into my stash and picked out some random sequins that I had to fill the blue one. But this purple one, I am using this Crafter's Companion mix here. When I have the right amount, I go ahead and take off the release paper of that last section, and that closes off your shaker. And then I always have these kind of ugly extra ends here, extra corners, and I just take my scissors and trim those off. It'll help the whole card adhere down a lot easier, and gives it a more flush adherence to the card base. To adhere your edge-to-edge shaker to your card base, I repeat the same process. I just add double-sided tape to the parts that have the acetate to them, and then to the middle where there is none of that clear packaging, I go ahead and put liquid glue. This just ensures that I'm double covered and that everything will adhere strongly and not fall off. I'm just going to go ahead and release all these backers, and then I will center it on top of my white card base. And of course I will repeat that with the blue one. Here I'm just showing you that this is how thin it is. It is super, super thin. It'll be really easy to mail. And those pieces shake pretty darn well, considering that there's really no like lift to them. Here I'm just deciding how I want to orient these sentiments. Again, you could use liquid glue to adhere these down, but I recommend using, again, a tape runner, and that's what I'm going to use here. I'm just grabbing a piece of scrap paper, and I'm going to run this tape runner along the back. And this is one of those that if you don't push down, it doesn't adhere until you do push down. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these little scraggly bits of glue that are hanging around, and then I'm going to lightly place this onto the card, and then when I'm happy with how they are arranged, then I will actually push them down firmly to adhere them in place permanently. I repeated this process for the blue one, however, I flipped the orientation, so instead of a portrait, it is a landscape card. Sorry, I'm kind of off screen here a little bit, sorry about that, but these are the cards complete. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope you felt inspired, and we will see you next time. Bye.